Hello. So today I'm going to talk about modal strengthening in Ecuadorian Siona. Okay, so first, Ecuadorian Siona is spoken by roughly 400 people in the Sucumbíos region in Ecuador. And it's part of the western branch of the Tucanoan language family. In this work, I present a case of a modal in Siona that is seemingly necessity, but is underlyingly possibility. Okay, so first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Siona root modal system as a whole. So there appears to be only two modal expressions in Siona that are dedicated to modality, to root modality. The first one that I will call baihi is formed from the expression there is plus infinitive. So if I say saije baihi, literally there is to go, that means we must go. There's another modal, deohi, and it literally means it is good. So if I say saije deohi, it is good to go, it means we can go. And both of these modals can be used in deontic and circumstantial contexts. In this talk, I will argue that the modal baihi, that is interpreted as necessity right here, is actually in fact a possibility modal that is strengthened to necessity in certain contexts by a process that I call scala simplification. So unembedded, as I said, the modal baihi is interpreted as necessity, and this is seen in translations. So whenever we ask for translations of baihi, it's only used as a necessity modal and never a possibility modal. And we can also test it in a list of contradictory possibilities. So if I say saije baihi, blaje baihi, this literally means one must go or one must stay. And this is contradictory. And this makes sense if baihi is interpreted as must. And we can contrast this with the possibility modal dohi. Saije dohi, blaje dohi. One can go, one can stay. You have the options, and that's not contradictory. Okay, so now I'm going to show you an initial puzzle that comes from negation. So baihi utterance can be negated by using a negated version of the copula. So literally there isn't to go, saije dohi. And that only means we mustn't go and does not mean we don't have to go. However, this is unexpected because if baihi were indeed a necessity modal, we would expect the not have to reading to arise instead. And this is because we expect a logic form in which the negation outscopes the modal. So this is the case in non-modal existential constructions. So with the same expression beohi, if I say there aren't trees, it means there aren't trees, but not there is something that's not a tree. So the negation again is outscopes the existential construction. And also there's cross-linguistic evidence that negation outscopes root modals in general, cross-linguistically. So why then do we end up with a strong reading instead? And I argue that the reason for this is that the quantificational force of the modal involved in these expressions is actually underlyingly possibility. So when negated, the expression yields a strong reading. And indeed, we can find a possibility reading of baihi that emerges in certain contexts. So for example, conditional antecedents, questions, and extra-clausal negation. So these are all non-upward entailing contexts. For example, in conditional antecedents, so here's a context. I'm waiting to see if there's going to be a spot in the boat for me. And my friend asked me if I want to go. Say jijiku, so that means you want to go. And I say jiju, yes. Say jibaito sasi. So here is a conditional form of baihi. And in this context, The only meaning that makes sense is if I can go, I will go, but not if I must go, I will go, because I just said I want to go. So here only a possibility reading of Baihi is possible. Note that this exact same sentence can also have a necessity reading. So the only thing I changed here in the context is that I don't want to go. In this case, it's felicitous to say if I have to go, I will go. Okay, so we see a similar phenomenon in questions. So if I say "tsiaha hunye baiku," this can mean either of two things. So is there a way of crossing the river? So can we cross a river, or do we have to cross a river? So here we see both a possibility and a necessity reading. And notice the contrast with an unembedded non-question context. Daihi, nothing has changed, and this cannot mean there is a way of crossing the river, and can only mean we have to cross the river. So again, both the possibility and necessity reading are available in the question, but not in the assertion. Okay, so to summarize, Daihi is interpreted as unambiguously necessity in unembedded contexts, unambiguously possibility under clause negation, and as possibility or necessity in non-upward entailing contexts. Okay, so here's my analysis of Baihi. I propose that it triggers, it's a possibility modal that triggers a scaleless implicature, which is a pragmatic strengthening from an existential quantification, so a possibility modal, to a universal one, corresponding to the necessity interpretation. And this arises from the lack of a necessity lexical item in the language. Okay, so what exactly is a scaleless implicature? Well, we can distinguish two related types of pragmatic strengthening. The first is very well known. It's called scalar implicature. So this arises from weak items such as can or some. So here you can leave triggers the implicature that you don't have to leave. And this is said to arise from the presence of a lexical scale in the language. Can and have to form a scale, and the implicature arises from negating a stronger alternative utterance containing have to, so you don't have to leave. In contrast, a scaleless implicature, so this is a phenomenon that's been observed more recently in the literature, arises when a weak item is not associated with a scale in the lexicon of the language. So here, for example, in Siona, Baihi means can underlyingly, but since there's no word for have to in the language, there's strengthening to you have to leave. And the implicature here arises from asserting the stronger alternative utterance containing this absent have to. Okay, so further evidence that scaleless and scalar implicatures should be analyzed in parallel is that they have a similar distribution. So just like scaleless implicatures, scalar implicatures don't arise under negation. So you can't leave does not mean, it's not the case you can but don't have to leave. And in non-upward entailing contexts like questions, they're just preferred but possible, right? So both readings are available. Can I go? You can say yes, in fact, you have to go. So here you did not compute the implicature in the question. Or no, you have to go. And here you're negating the scalar implicature from the question. Okay, so I do have a formal implementation of this analysis, but for reasons of time and technicality, I leave it to the appendix. So to conclude, the force of the Siona modal Baihi appears to depend on the environment it is in. And I analyze it as a possibility modal that strengthens to a necessity in simple context via scaleless implicature, doesn't strengthen under negation, and optionally strengthens in other non-upward entailing contexts. So this work further supports the claim that scalar implicatures arise from negating stronger alternatives formed from scales present in the lexicon of the language. Because when they're absent, like in Siona, scalar implicatures are also absent and a scalist strengthening arises instead. Thank you for listening.